Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, I want to talk about some of the utility functions that are provided by the C standard library. And these do exactly what you would think, just some utilities, some generic general functions to do various different things. To use the utility functions, they're usually in standard lib.h, so you include that header file. Some of the functions I'm going to describe, just useful functions, one is the absolute value, ABS. Returns the absolute value of an argument. Absolute value is converting it to a positive. So if you pass in a negative or so forth, it will return you the positive value. There's a function called exit. I've used this a bit in our main function. It will take an integer, usually a return value, and usually a negative number means there's an error. A positive number, or 0 means no error, or 1 means no error. This will terminate the program though. It will just jump right out. So if you're in a main function, you do a return, you can return from the main function, but exit is usually to close the program. There are some constants as well defined, such as exit success and exit failure, that you can use if you don't want to use numbers. Other related routines in the library that you might want to refer to are abort and at exit. And you will see this in quite a bit of C programs, especially abort. Abort is when there's some kind of error, like if you can't malloc, you may call abort, and you can set it as signal. So the good thing with abort is it will generate a core file depending on the signal. A core file can be helped to debug for further information. But exit, abort, and at exit are very useful functions, usually invoked when you have a fatal error. Okay. There's a get environment function which will allow you to read environment variables. Environment variables are usually associated with your environment. So they're a variable that you can use. It's kind of like a global variable that you can use anywhere on the operating system. So if it's Linux, you have an environment variable for your path. There's environment variables in Windows to specify paths or where different programs are located, or just generic global variables. You can set an environment variable, and then you can read it using this function get environment. And it will read in that environment variable, and you can use it in your program. So again, if things like path, anything is related with your shell or related with your environment, get environment is very useful. There's a qsort function. This will sort the data array pointed to by the void pointer array. So there's an array that's taken as a first parameter, and it's going to sort it. There's going to be n elements in the array. Each size bytes in the length, and the n and the size are of type size t. So there's 4 variables that go to this function. But the qsort's nice because you can sort an array. The 4th argument is a pointer to the function that you want to use for sorting. So it can become more complicated, but this function is very useful when you need to compare 2 elements in an array. You can pass in the pointers to the elements that you want to compare against. We have a random function. We use this in one of our challenges, rand. This will generate a random number. You can specify a seed if you want in another function, or it will just generate a random number between minimum value of 3276 and minimum value 0, random maximum value 3276. So rand max is defined in standard lib.h. You'll often use this with the srand function, which provides a seed. A seed can provide a certain range. It will make the numbers maybe more random too. So it seeds the random number generator to an unsigned int. System is a function that you can invoke to execute system calls. I used it in the class to do a pause, but anything you can run from the console, like changing directories, changing permissions if you're on Linux, executing other programs, you can do all of this through the system. And so this will actually run a command in your shell, whether it's the DOS prompt or you're using a shell on Linux. It will run that command. So for example, you could say system make dir, and it will create a directory of whatever you specified in the argument to make dir. It's all inside double quotes, so it takes a string. System is very, very useful as well. The assert library is useful for debugging. We didn't get a chance to talk a lot about assert, but I did briefly want to mention it. It's a library that's in assert.h, and it's one to help with debugging. So assert is saying something is true. So you can put assert inside your code to make sure that something is true before you move on to the next line of code. There's an assert macro that you're going to use, and it takes an argument such as an integer expression. If the expression evaluates to false, the assert macro writes an error message to standard error stream and calls the abort function. So your program will terminate. So you can put something in your code that basically says something like this. You can say z is equal to x times x minus x times y. And then you can assert that z is greater than or equal to 0. If that returns false, your program is going to exit. Otherwise, it will execute the next line of code. So it's like making true assumptions throughout your code. You want to make sure that certain values are what they are before you move on to the next. This is essentially making sure that you're not like dividing by 0, or that you didn't have a 0 value when you did this multiplication. You'll often see assert inside of C programs for debugging. Other useful header files that you may want to look into, time.h. Time.h has all sorts of different functions and macros for supporting different dates and times, usually returning a time t struct. But you can get the date, you can get the time. Errno.h or errornumber.h, this defines macros for reporting of errors. Often used again for better debugging and reporting specific errors. So a lot of functions you use in the standard libraries, if they fail, they may return a number for a specific error. And it's more important when you use some socket functions and other things because there could be many different errors. Sometimes it's useful to know what's going on as opposed to just say there's an error is not very helpful. To say a specific type of error is much useful. So you can get error numbers using this to help with further debugging. Locale.h, there's a bunch of functions and macros in this header for formatting different currencies and monetary units. Signal.h, this is useful for usually for program termination, generating different signals. Signals isn't a topic that we covered in a lot of detail, but this could be useful when you call abort, specifying specific signals why the program crashed or program terminated. And you can use these, if you understand signals, you can use them in your core file as well. Standardarg.h, this defines different facilities that enable a variable number of arguments to be passed to a function. var args. We use var args in printf, but we didn't create our own functions of arg. It's a more advanced topic. But these are basic header files that you may find useful for getting times, error numbers, and so forth. These are good utility functions, so I hope this was helpful. Thank you.